today we are digging into the new Anaconda film. And wow, what a critical disaster. It's this fascinating story of confusing scores, a star that split critics right down the middle, and a movie that was just completely at war with itself. So let's get into it.
So if you just pull up Rotten Tomatoes, the numbers seem, well, they seem okay-ish. You see a 52% fresh score from all the critics, and you might think, hey, that's not so bad. Just over half of them liked it. How terrible can it be?
But this is where the plot thickens. The moment you filter for just the top critics, the really established, respected voices, that 52% doesn't just drop. It completely craters. It plummets to a dismal 27%. That's not a dip. That's a nosedive.
That massive gap between the scores tells you there's a much bigger story here. It's a real critical puzzle. So let's dig into what the reviewers were actually saying to figure out what went so incredibly wrong. It seems like the movie's problems really started from the very beginning. We're talking about its whole foundation, a marketing idea that, on the surface, seemed pretty clever, but critics saw as deeply, deeply flawed. The movie's whole angle, its big hook, was this defiant tagline, screamed in all caps. It was trying to tell everyone, hey, we're not just another lazy reboot. We're a smart, self-aware take on Hollywood's obsession with its own past. It's a neat idea, at least on paper. Well, the critics weren't buying it. They pretty much called it a classic bait and switch. The movie promised this sharp, witty deconstruction of the original Anaconda. What they actually got, though, is a film that ditched its clever premise almost immediately and just turned into another generic, forgettable snake movie. As one reviewer put it, maybe a little too bluntly, that whole self-referential idea just couldn't hold up. And why? Because the core concept itself was just too thin. There wasn't enough there to support a whole movie, and it felt like they just ran out of steam. Okay, next we have to talk about the star of the show, Jack Black, because he was another huge point of division for critics. It's actually a pretty fascinating look at the limits of pure star power. This quote just perfectly sums up how critics felt about his performance. He showed up and gave everyone exactly what they expect from Jack Black. That full-force, high-energy, zany comedy persona. No surprises there. And that right there created this weird paradox. The good thing about casting Jack Black is that he's a reliable brand. You know what you're getting. But the bad thing? Well, you know exactly what you're getting. And critics felt that familiar routine was just a one-note performance that couldn't save the weak script he was working with. So here's the bottom line. Even the massive charisma and frantic energy of a star like Jack Black wasn't enough. It couldn't overcome the film's other huge, fundamental problems. He just couldn't carry that much weight on his own. So, okay, even if you look past the shaky premise and the divided opinions on Jack Black, critics pointed to an even bigger problem. The film was just a complete and total tonal mess. You gotta love this quote, right? Using the snake's own imagery against it. This was a common theme in the reviews. The movie tried to be everything at once, a comedy, an action movie, a horror film, a parody, and by doing that, it ended up being nothing at all. I mean, just follow this wild ride. It kicks off as that silly meta-parody it promised to be, then it suddenly shifts gears into a totally standard action movie with generic chase scenes. After that, it kind of flirts with being a horror comedy for a bit, before finally just giving up and relying on clumsy, overused songs to try and make you feel something. All that tonal whiplash left critics calling the movie a shockingly bad mess. It just had no coherent vision, no singular voice, and that ultimately made the whole thing feel unfocused and, maybe worst of all, completely forgettable. But here we go, for a movie that was sold first and foremost as a comedy. Critics saved their most brutal, most pointed takedowns for its failure to do the one thing it absolutely had to do: be funny. Ouch. I mean, it doesn't really get more savage than that, does it? One reviewer called that a shotgun level of comment. And yeah, it pretty much captures the feeling that the film's jokes just did not land. At all. And the hits just keep on coming. The puns, the meta-humor, all the winks to the audience. Critics said they all just fell painfully, completely flat. And this quote just perfectly nails the core problem with the humor. The movie's relentless effort to be clever, to be in on the joke, didn't come across as funny. It came across as desperate. It felt exhausting, like a movie trying way, way too hard and just failing with every swing. So when you put all of these pieces together, the flawed idea, the tonal chaos, the laugh-free comedy, the full picture of this critical failure becomes, well, crystal clear. It's really the perfect recipe for disaster, isn't it? You start with a shallow idea that you dress up as something brilliant. You add a star who just can't overcome the script. You throw in a totally inconsistent tone. And then you top it all off by failing to deliver on the most basic promise of a single laugh. But in the end, this might be the most devastating review of all. Because being bad is one thing, but the film's greatest sin, according to critics, was just how forgettable it was. It wasn't destined to be hated, just completely erased from memory. And this whole mess leaves us with a much bigger question, doesn't it? This movie tried so hard to make fun of Hollywood's obsession with its own past, but in its failure, it just became another symptom of the disease. It really makes you wonder, as pop culture keeps eating its own tail, are we just doomed to an endless cycle of movies with absolutely nothing new to say?